So far, what we've been doing is talking about ecology at the population level. And again, a population is when you have a group of many organisms, they're interacting, but they're all the same species. What we're going to switch over to now is what's called the community level. When you've got a set of populations found together in the same time and space so that you've got multiple species interacting. There are a couple of different things you need to know about the interactions between species. Species can interact directly. So for example, when a great horned owl attacks and eats grouse, the presence of the owl or the number of owls in the environment affects the number of grouse. If you've got more owls, you tend to have fewer grouse. That's a direct interaction. You can also, though, have what are called indirect interactions. If great horned owls tend to eat weasels, and weasels prey on grouse or grouse eggs, then the owls are going to affect the grouse, but not because they directly interact with them. They affect the grouse because both they and the grouse interact with the weasel. So one thing you're going to want to keep in mind is that species can interact directly or indirectly. And sometimes those indirect interactions, as we'll see, really matter. When you're talking about direct interactions, there are a number of different ways of classifying them. But the way I'm going to be approaching the classifications of interspecific interactions among different species, is by thinking about the effect that that interaction has on the two species that are involved. It's possible, whenever two species interact, for that interaction to affect either one of them positively or negatively or not at all. And that's what's shown here in this chart. Whenever species 1 and species 2 interact, it may have a positive effect on species 1, may have a negative effect or not at all, and the same is true for species 2. So what are these different kinds of interactions that can show up? Some of them are more interesting than others, but let me go ahead and show you the names, or introduce you to the names that ecologists have for these different interactions. When the interaction between two species helps them both, that's called a mutualism. Okay, mutualists are partners in an interaction that's beneficial for both species. When you have an interaction where one species is positively affecting the other isn't affected, that's called commensalism. Exploitation is the general kind of umbrella term for when you have two species interacting directly. It helps one of them and it hurts the other. And generally when we talk about exploitation, what we're really talking about is somebody's eating somebody else. That can be because one individual is a parasite feeding on a host. It can be because you've got a predator feeding on prey. It can be because you have a grazer or an herbivore feeding on small amounts of many individuals. There are lots of different exploitation interactions, but they all have the same effect, that when you have more exploiters, that tends to harm the exploited species and bring its numbers down. Amensalism is unusual. That's where you have an interaction that is harmful for one of the species and the other one doesn't really care that it's there at all. But by far the most common interaction that you see among species is competition. In fact, for a very long time in the history of ecology, the study of interactions among species was the study of competition, because ecologists used to think that it was really the only interesting thing happening when you're looking at the interactions among species. So here are the different terms that are involved. In general, what we're going to be most interested in are mutualisms, exploitations, and competition, because those are the most common. In reality, all of these categories occur on a spectrum. so that you can have mutualisms that are much more favorable for one species than the other. You can have exploitations that have so little impact on on the species that's being harmed that it's practically a commensalism, and so forth. But these categories are convenient for thinking about the ways in which multiple species interact.